And speaking of the left wing agendas, that's what we saw with school mask mandates. So we bring back our favorite supermom activist, Lori Gaddis Barrett. Lori, welcome back to In the Dugout.
Hi, Mike. Thank you.
Lori, I saw you on the videos and on the courthouse steps last week. Your parents showed up en masse. You were hoping to settle your lawsuit with the state,
Yeah.
but as we discussed with Rich Southwell, the lead plaintiff, the state didn't want to hear it. Your take on it all.
So, I mean, it was obviously disappointing because we were hoping to find the path of least resistance to the end, right? As you know, we've been working on trying to obtain discovery from the state of Rhode Island, from both the governor's office and the Rhode Island Department of Health since last December. So, it's over a year we've been at this,
Yep.
and we're really just not satisfied with the responses that we're getting. And the state has been arguing something called the deliberative process privilege, which typically you would see this. We've seen it a couple of times at the national level when it relates to homeland security. But that's not the type of question that we're asking, right? What the types of question we're asking is, where's your science?
If they told you they'd have to kill you, kind of stuff, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, you should be able to tell us what you relied on and who you spoke with and how you made your decisions. That's what we're asking. And so the state is really fighting it so hard, they won't even give us a list of the documents they won't give us that relate to this privilege that we're not even sure exists at all. And if it does it exist in the state of Rhode Island? And if it does it apply to our case? So so that's kind of
Now,
where we are. And so that's why the judge, I think, was looking for that path of least resistance. Like instead of, you know, duking this out in the Supreme Court about the deliberative process
right,
privilege, that would be precedent setting law really here in Rhode Island. So
right, to avoid all that, and the deal seemed so reasonable, so favorable to the state that it didn't they didn't have to admit any guilt or wrongdoing or any implication of such. It was all forward looking, only without any prejudice, I think is the term you would use. But I'm not gonna say confused. I was surprised that you, as the parents, because you were the one who organized all the plaintiffs, were willing to go along with something where the state, after all this battle, why is sort of a no fault settlement something that would be acceptable to you guys?
you're right. So recall, we're not suing for money, we're suing for information.
Right.
And we're not getting it. And so if there's an opportunity to get it through litigation, we'll take it. That's where we are now. But if there's an opportunity for everyone to get at least something through a public hearing, we felt that that was an acceptable risk to take. I mean, obviously, we've always felt the
Future
science
public
was
hearing
on our
for
side.
right. A future public hearing for a future emergency, but you were willing to give up the information on this past pandemic.
To a certain extent, we were,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, and
Okay.
that's a fair characterization. It would have allowed the settlement would have
Well, it's very
allowed
generous of you guys.
well, the settlement would have allowed Governor McKee to keep his secrets, and but it would not have allowed the Rhode Island Department of Health to keep secrets. And since most of this was driven through the Rhode Island Department of Health, they were the ones with the emergency, uh, doing the emergency rule and giving the guidance to the schools. We felt that that was the best, where we wanted to apply the most pressure, so to speak. And so, again, we're very confident in our position. We're confident that if there were a public hearing, we would be able to get higher profile people to come up and testify on our behalf about what the science actually is and how that might relate to the future. That's why we were willing. And we
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yep. All right. Well, now they use the term. Well, I think if I recall, they use a term, or somebody said they used the term. The attorney for the Department of Health and for Governor McKee said, "Well, our stakeholders didn't want to agree with this. Who would be those stakeholders on their end, in your
Oh, what a great
opinion?"
question.
Was
I'll tell
that
you who we're suing. We're suing Governor McKee, and we're suing now Uptala Bondi and as the acting director of health. That's who we're suing. So I don't know if they were considering external agencies or whether they were governmental or non-governmental. I don't know if they were considering the CDC a stakeholder.
That was my question. Are they trying to protect the CDC here?
Well, we don't know, right? And frankly, it's our understanding that Judge Lamphere asked those questions, like who are the stakeholders, we know who your clients are, but who are these other stakeholders? And the state declined to answer. And it's our understanding that that's kind of sort of reasonable under attorney-client privilege. But we don't know. We don't know who these mysterious stakeholders are. I mean, we know our side, parents and kids.
Yep. What we also know is that the state is doing everything it can not to turn over its information, like you mentioned earlier.
Right.
When you filed your lawsuit, and as it early in the early, because we covered it extensively here with you and Rich Southwell and Attorney Piccirilli.
Right.
The theory was the emperor had no clothes. There wasn't no scientific or data research to support these mask mandates, and by extension, later on, the vaccine mandates, or any of this stuff, the lockdowns. And they don't want the public to find out about it. And you guys are threatening to find out about it through the discovery process. But also, to the stakeholder claim, the same can be said for the CDC nationally, right? They did the same thing. So do you think your theory, do you feel even stronger with your theory now than you did when you filed?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially because the reason we filed the lawsuit is to get the information that we couldn't get through public records requests. And again, right back at the time, the General Assembly wasn't in session. The Speaker of the House would not call them back into session. I mean, I guess it was fine to do it if you thought you could take a vote on marijuana, but not on the mask mandates. And eventually, the emergency rule ran out, and the masks did come off the kids. And the focus again is forward looking, like the masks are currently off the kids. But here's what's interesting. Along with this deliberative process privilege, there's been a lot of discussion about what the Attorney General could have done or should have done with regard to changing the laws. I won't get into delegation of authority, but
the emergency laws, you mean?
The emergency laws. And there's a reason they're 180 days, and the reason is the General Assembly is out of session for 180 days. So last year, you may recall, we had then Deputy Speaker Charlene Lima introduced a bill that would have specifically addressed how the Rhode Island Department of Health handles mandates for children in schools K through 12. And the legislation was mocked. The parents who came to testify, they were mocked by the legislators in the room, and the bill didn't actually go anywhere. But Neil Heitinen from the Rhode Island Department of Health did come and testify. And as we were kind of thinking through the settlement agreement, what we realized now that we didn't realize back then, he was signaling to the General Assembly, they don't want, the Rhode Island Department of Health has never wanted to go through the normal regulatory process. And they've been pretty overt at stating that the reason they don't want to do it is because they don't want to have their hands tied in the event of the next pandemic. So it's really up to our General Assembly to either force them to do it or through the judicial process to force them to do it. So we'll see.
So the settlement, we don't need to go into details. I want to ask you it this way, because we went through that with Rich on Friday. But basically, the settlement would have established a permanent rule for a transparent debate on any new regulation in any kind of health emergency in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you, it might be an unfair question, but I'm sure you thought this through in your mind, because you think through everything in your mind. The next emergency, health emergency, how should it unfold in your mind before any kind of mandate or edict is issued by the Department of Health or the state? How should it unfold?
So there are parents that are involved in the lawsuit that are definitely wouldn't want any mandates at all. I think at one point during the pandemic, I was personally more understanding of the direction and the guidance. And I think it's important to have compassion, right? Hindsight's 2020. Yes, there are people that knew and always knew. And then there were people that didn't find out until maybe a year later when their lid got flipped with the mask mandate after we were promised local decision. And then there were people like me that, came to the conclusion somewhere along a spectrum. And I think that that's going to be true no matter what kind of pandemic or health emergency that would come in the future. So what I would like to see happen is that we have compassion for leaders who are just trying to do the best that they can with limited amount of information, and they've got a state to run. But I think what we now know is, of course, lockdowns don't work. It shatters the economy. It ruins everything. I don't think we can ever do another lockdown. As far as a mask mandate, obviously, my position, masks don't
You
work.
know that one, yeah.
So that's kind of silly. But I think it's fine for government leaders who have to look out for the piece of the population that believes that they do work. And I think that's okay for them to, take some steps to
That's
make
the
sure that
reason we should have a public debate. Let them present their case. Let people like Dr. Bostrom and other experts look at it from their point of view, and then lawmakers or state official department heads make the best. But at least they've had an open and honest debate on the facts, right, and the science.
Right. And I think, part of that needs to go into the modeling, because in the very beginning of the pandemic,
Right.
they were making decisions based on models that turned out to be so wildly inaccurate, but then they kept on with the restrictions based on models they knew didn't work. So, and I think that's the value and the benefit of the process that we would have agreed to settle to, because it would have forced those kind of conversations. It would have forced that kind of critical thinking, and resulted in improvements. And I think that would have benefited every Rhode Islander, regardless of what your feelings were on the particular pandemic that we've basically just gone through.
All right, we have just a few minutes left. I want to switch gears and I want to talk to you about something we've been covering quite a bit, but again, it was you that turned us on to the issue. This is why you're the super mom.
Thank you.
So this Courageous Rhode Island group, funded by the Department of Homeland Security via a grant to the University of Rhode Island, ending up in this group's hand. I was immediately suspicious, and I've been more than suspicious. When I read some of their premises, I just think it's another left-wing silence of first speech, kind of Mary Poppins. What do they call it? The Disinformation Governance Board that the DHS couldn't implement nationally. Now they're trying to go to a little puny state like Rhode Island here and overwhelm us with money and get something done here. I'm much more cynical about it than you are. But anyway, your views on this Courageous Rhode Island thing.
So, Courageous Rhode Island is a program that was set up through a grant from Department of Homeland Security to University of Rhode Island. And so we're seeing other government agencies give grants similar to this, to other places, which is what made us very curious to find out more about the program. As you know, one of our early red flags was that when they spoke about parents, it was part of their manifesto, and it was under the subheading "How Hate is Cultivated." and so, as you know, we had a lot of questions, and we decided to go find out answers. So let me tell you the happy news. Many of our parents signed up to go to the first Courageous conversation.
Oh, they actually went. Okay.
We did.
How courageous was it?
It was. It was one of those spectrum things, right? Depending on which side you're on, right? So what happened was they took a piece of media, and the woman that's running this, Renee Hobbs, I guess she's written a couple of books. I want to be fair. She did a nice job making sure that everybody's perspective got heard. So I do think it's important, for even whether you agree or disagree with the program, I think it's important to show up and make your voice heard. And I can attest that will happen. But what they did during the program is they took a TikTok video that had gone viral about a story in North Kingstown. And the TikTok creator had the news story behind him in one of those green screen things. And he gave, what I thought was a pretty fair presentation of the words that were written, excuse me, on the screen behind him. And one of the first questions that they walk you through during this courageous conversation is like, oh, how did that piece of media make you feel? And it was shocking, some of the responses, because people were saying anxious, fearful, unsafe. And of course, I'm talking about the controversy where one of the town council members in North Kingstown had intervened on behalf of a constituent to get better answers from the school committee about what was going on with, gender identity in the schools. And, the case.
We got 30 seconds, Lori. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So we got through that, and the next one I think is next week. So I would encourage everyone to go to the website and sign up and go learn.
Lori, hey, thanks for your time today. Thanks for all you do in this state, and we'll have you back on soon. Thanks, Lori.
Great. Thank you. Bye.